Hey everybody, welcome to Vista Buddhist Temple's second annual Buddhist Community Gathering. My name is Ricky Schlesinger. I am president of the temple and one of the organizers of the event. For those of you who may be less familiar with our temple, Vista is about a 30-minute drive north of downtown San Diego. And we are one of 59 Shin Buddhist temples that are members of the Buddhist Churches of America, and they're headquartered in Berkeley, California. Our first Buddhist community gathering was held at our temple about a year ago, similar event except in person at our temple. Since everything's gone viral, including Buddhism, we figured that we would redefine our community as global. And today we have attendees from all around the country, some from around the world. And we even have one of our guest speakers who will be joining us from Australia. So our topic today is how do Buddhists cope in times of turmoil and cultivate change through compassionate action. Our intent was to pick a contemporary topic and view it through a lens of diverse Buddhist practices. And I don't think we could pick anything more topical these days than times of turmoil. So I am anxious to hear what everybody has to say. We're fortunate to have three very esteemed Buddhist teachers with us today. They're all from different practices, each with a different point of view. And proudly, all three of them happen to be friends of the Vista Buddhist Temple. The first will be Reverend Uzuki from our Shin Buddhist tradition. Then Brother Fapai, senior monastic disciple of the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. And third, Dr. Larry Ward, co-founder of the Lotus Institute. So here's how we're going to proceed today. Each speaker will speak for about 20 minutes, followed by the three speakers. There'll be a 5-minute break. Then we're going to have a 20-minute moderated panel discussion with all three of our teachers. If you would like to address a question to any of our teachers or all of our teachers, you can go to the chat box and address it to our co-host, Casey Mattermay. And she's also one of the moderators, along with Judy Nakatomi of the panel discussion. Don't forget to mute your volume and to reduce our background noise. From a video, you can choose to leave it on or off. Today's discussion will be recorded, just as a reminder, and that you'll get a notice along with a short survey sometime after and when the recording is being posted. So with that, I want to turn it over to Terry Amori. I think.
Here I am. Thank you, Ricky. Well, welcome everyone. Today it's an honor for me and a pleasure to introduce our first presenter today, a wonderful Dharma teacher from the Jodo Shinshu Buddhist tradition and a dear friend, Reverend Patricia Kanaya Uzuki. Reverend Uzuki is a third-generation Japanese-Canadian born and raised in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And her academic career includes receiving a Bachelor of Arts degree in Modern Languages and Literature from the University of Toronto and an education degree from the University of Ottawa. After receiving her Master's of Arts degree from the Graduate Theological Union Institute of Buddhist Studies in Berkeley, California, Reverend Uzuki traveled to Kyoto, Japan and graduated from the Chuo Bukkyo Gakuin Seminary, receiving her ordination in 2002. I believe that Reverend Uzuki's wealth of Dharma sharing is due to her amazing life experiences. She has lived in France, New York, Ecuador, and Japan. Her career includes working for the government of Canada as a public servant, a public school teacher in Toronto, and an English teacher in Japan. And while in Kyoto, Reverend Uzuki was a European language specialist in French, Spanish, Portuguese, German, and Italian for the Honpa Honganji International Department at our main temple. Reverend Fusuki is also an author. Her book, Currents of Change, American Buddhist Women Speak Out on Jodo Shinshu, was published in 2007. Reverend Uzuki's ministry with the Buddhist Churches of America includes the resident minister at the San Fernando Valley Honganji Buddhist Temple in Los Angeles, California for 16 years. She was also the chairperson of the Ministers Association for 2 years. And this past August, Reverend Uzuki retired from the Buddhist Churches of America. Now, one personal fun fact. Reverend Patty, who many of us so fondly address her, was married to Reverend Fumiaki Uzuki at the Vista Buddhist Temple. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Reverend Patricia Uzuki.
Okay, thank you, Terry. You didn't add one additional fun fact there. Terry and her husband Ford stood up for us at our marriage ceremony at Vista. So we're really close friends, even though I didn't recognize Terry the next time I met her. But I sure do now. Okay, well, I'm so joyful, feel so happy to be here just to see you, Terry, and I know Ford's sitting there too somewhere, but especially all of our Dharma friends here today, and to have the opportunity to get to hear the other panelists, our wonderful teachers. I think that will give us all a break from whatever it is we're all feeling right now. Before I get too carried away there, I would like to do what we call gassho, literally the two Chinese or Japanese characters mean palms together. So Namo Amida Butsu Namandabs Namandabs. As I'm a Jodo Shin Buddhist minister, we say Namo Amida Butsu. Amida coming from Amitabha, infinite light, equating infinite wisdom, and Amitayas, infinite life, equating to infinite and immeasurable compassion. So we think of gassho, putting our hands together as I, this imperfect being, and the oneness of all life, immeasurable life, coming together as one, the oneness of all life. So I take refuge in the oneness of all life. So Namo Amida Butsu. And thank you so much for inviting me here today. I hope it's just not on the basis of our being BFFs, but but I do feel truly honored. There's so much to talk about, and as Ricky said, we only have 20 minutes each, and then the bell's gonna ring. And people who know me know that this is going to be an enormous challenge. So, so much to say, so little time. And because we're all from different Buddhist traditions, I just want to focus on a couple of things that we try to keep in mind, though it doesn't mean that it's exclusive to us. And I just want to refer back to the flyer because I wanted to keep on topic. And it seems to me that you're asking for a lot of information here on seemingly different topics. And so we'll try to touch on them. But number one, how do Buddhists cope in times of turmoil? And then there's, I guess, how to cultivate change through compassionate action. And then down here, snuck into the bottom corner, let's see, it says, come and listen to these teachers share their practices for for engaging more fully amidst a global pandemic and social unrest. So we could see them as three different things, but actually, I'm going to try to find a way to tie them together from a Jodo Shinshu perspective. But as I know that we have quite a wide and varied audience here today, and I don't know if everybody is familiar with the basic tenets of Buddhism or not. I'm going to try to steer clear of too much technicality or what I call code words. And so for you Shin Buddhists, if you're wondering, is this our minister? Yes, it is. But I just want to speak plain English as much as I can, which is also sometimes a challenge for us because we get so used to using shortcuts. But let me get the ball rolling for all of us. And that is to remember why we're on the path of the Buddha Dharma. And essentially, to learn the Dharma is to study yourself. It's about self-awareness. The reason that I'm emphasizing this right at this point is because I know that we all care about others, and we have so many huge concerns every day, all of the things going on within society, with the pandemic, with climate change, with all sorts of global issues going on. But we really shouldn't lose sight of something that underpins it all, and that is that each of us has to take care of learning the Dharma for ourselves, for the reason that I think of it this way: if you see someone drowning and you don't know how to swim, you wouldn't just jump into the water, right? And so you need to know, because I can't swim, you need to know how to swim first. And so it's something that we easily forget sometimes when we're so passionate about getting out there and doing things to help others. But that's one thing that I wanted us to remember. To get back to this question of how do Buddhists cope in times of turmoil, I have a suspicion that a lot of people are logging in because they really would like to know an answer or a response to that question. And when I looked at it, it sort of took me aback. I'd like to reframe it perhaps as, how do people cope? And then when you think of it that way, you know, is that what it's all about coping? What am I saying here? Yes, you know, we have a global pandemic going on. Yes, there are huge and terrible social issues, politics. We can't ignore the elephant in the room, divisiveness and so on. But at the same time, I'll fess up. This is what Jodo Shinshu ministers are famous for. You know, we have to use ourselves as the example. Yes, I care about those things. I care about them deeply. Hey, I even have a seminar on Buddhism and economics because it bothers me so much about economic inequity. But I also have issues that I deal with, such as, the other day, my car battery died. Oh, and I was on my way to take some donation items to the rescue mission. And so, you know, I had this whole conflict of thoughts in my mind. I'm doing something nice here, but my car broke down. Oh, no. And then right after that, my computer broke down. I'm dealing with everyday things just like everyone else. If you're not Shin Buddhist, or maybe even if you are, you need to say that, we're ordained as priests, but we do not have a monastic tradition. And essentially, we ministers are also householders. So yes, as Terry mentioned, I recently retired. And so that meant moving to our own home here in Oxnard, California. And so I'm learning to live in a new place, in a new family configuration. My husband's mother lives with us. And so, there's lots of of things that maybe you could sometimes say, how do I cope with this, right? And so my question here is, wouldn't we rather be able to cope with anything? If you want to use the word cope, I'll get back to that. But wouldn't we rather be able to deal with anything, not just global pandemics, not just social issues? I don't mean just in a minimal sense. I mean, wouldn't we rather be equipped to feel empowered, to be able to transcend anything, whether it's worrying about your aging dog, which I do, or worrying about the millions of people who don't have work, who are wondering where their next meal's going to come from. How are we going to get rid of systemic racism in our society? How are we going to bring back the humanity to our world? I do think about the whole range of things, but I've got to look at my own conditions right now. So there's two things from our point of view that we want to look at. One is that I'm simply a foolish, imperfect being. Yes, I'm privileged to be able to immerse myself in the study of the Dharma, and until I retired, be really literally immersed in it all the time in my living. But nonetheless, it's a lifelong thing, and I'm still going to have my moments when I complain, when I worry, when things don't go my way and I get bent out of shape, when I get afraid of things at the unknown. Do you feel that way sometimes? I feel that way too. But at the same time, I have to realize that I receive so much compassion. When I said Namo Amida Butsu, I rely on infinite life. I rely on the infinite wisdom and compassion of life. And I know from my life experience that it supports me, regardless of whether I'm an imperfect being or not. You know, I can complain all I want. I can get angry. I can not be skillful in Buddhist terms, and yet I receive this compassion. And when I reflect on it deeply, it gives me so much comfort. But not only that, it gives me great strength. Now, when we look at this question about cultivate change through compassionate action, that sounds like something that we are doing. So I want to ask the question, whose compassion is it anyway? Whose compassion is it anyway, even if I feel that I'm the one doing it? Look at our causes and conditions from the infinite past that have brought each of us to do what we do, to think what we think, or to say what we say. It's different for everyone. But we don't come up with this on our own. This is something that we receive as part of infinite life, of which we are a part. And so we need to remember this, because too often we get it mixed up, and in an ordinary sense we say, oh, I want to be compassionate towards this person. And so I want to talk a little bit about our limitations. Yes, of course, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to empathize, to feel for others, to care for others, to love others, but it's limited. So on that note, I have a little short video that one of the members of San Fernando had sent me, and I'd like you to have a look at it, and then I'm going to ask you a question right after, okay? So Sterling, if we could please have the video. It's just about 3 minutes long. Thanks, Sterling. Well, before you think on it, I mean, it was, to me, very moving, but I'd also like to ask all of you to think about this. What else is going on in your heart and mind? First, number one, could this even be possible these days? And, you know, maybe 50 cents, okay, but if it were in 2020 dollars, how would you feel about it? So let me put it this way. How would you feel? We know this, we just had elections here. How do you feel about the thought of taxes going up, for example, even if they were meant to help people who are direly in need? We don't even need to have this kind of reenactment because we can turn on our TV and see the miles of lines of people who are waiting to receive donations of food and so on. But my point here is this. I like to think that most of us wish we could do something to help everyone, to make this go away so that everybody had enough. But the fact of the matter is that we have our limitations. So whether it's monetary or physical or whatever it is, we also have limitations as human beings. All you have to do is think about how, if you do, say, volunteer work, how you might complain, how come I'm the only one who's ever doing it? You might complain to yourself, but complain nonetheless. Or do you do things because you don't want to look bad? Really, you don't have to admit this to anyone else. We're in a large group. Normally, I'd like to have a dialogue about this where we're all honest about these things, how we really feel. And then on top of it all, there's this reality. We may think we wish to do something, but at the moment of truth, we are incapable of doing it, whether it's something positive or negative. We really don't know ourselves because of our deep karmic past, karma not being destiny or fate, but because of the causes and conditions that have accumulated in our lives. We all react differently. So to come back to this compassion, Terry, how much time have I got? Anyway, I know. Sorry?
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, I'll talk faster. No, self-reflection, realize that the compassion that you do share is not yours, but it comes to you through the oneness of all life. But also understand that, for example, when we say the metta prayer, we start with, after the general opening, may all beings be happy and well, may no harm or difficulties come to them, may they live in peace and harmony. We always start with ourselves because we need to be happy and well. And so, and then we go to our family and friends and so on. And that's the greatest way to share with others. Benefiting self is benefiting others as well. So to remember that, I'm sure that the other panelists will also speak about compassionate action, but just to get us grounded in where we're coming from so we don't forget about that important point of taking care of your own Dharma work. This is your choice, something you can do. It works for me. I don't know if it will work for you, but this is something that each of us has to choose. It's not something that we tell you, you must do. So, and finally, you know, as I said, I've got pages and pages of background I wrote up on this. And so if you're Shin Buddhist or even not, you need to ask for a seminar with your minister or someone about these whole ideas that I was only able to kind of gloss over here today, but I'm going to beat the clock. So thank you very much. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandas. Finish, Terry.
Thank you, Reverend Uzuki. That was very moving. Thank you for your insight into the Jodo Shinshu perspective on how to cope with both personal and worldwide struggles, and how to face our own moments of truth. I would like now to introduce our next speaker, Brother Fapai. He is a monk and a teacher in the Plum Village tradition that was founded by Thich Nhat Hanh. Brother Fapai is currently residing at the Mountain Spring Monastery in Australia. You can see videos of some of his Dharma talks through the CompassionateOceansangha.org website. I was happy to hear him teach just last month at the online retreat for the 20th anniversary of the Deer Park Monastery here in Escondido. Today we are pleased to have him back in Southern California via Zoom for our Buddhist Community Gathering. Welcome, Brother Fapai, and good morning.
Thank you so much, Leah. It's so heartwarming and such a delight to have a chance to connect with each of you and to connect with my dearly beloved Vista Buddhist Temple, as well as the wider community. I often think of all of you, and you're so dear to my heart. And I'm really in awe of the work that the Buddhist Churches of America and Vista Buddhist Temple does. So it's a real honor to be with you today. It's a special honor for me to also have a chance to listen to and to learn with Reverend Patty and Dr. Larry Ward, both of whom, for me, are incredibly powerful teachers for our world at this time. And I feel that this is such a beautiful weaving today from the different lineages of Buddhism. And I'm very touched and honored to have an opportunity to be here. Before we began our session, I was joking with everybody as we were doing a sound check that I'm living your future at the moment, and it doesn't look too bad. So that's already a reassurance. I'd like to begin my sharing in the same way that we begin all of our activities here in Australia. We have the tradition in Australia called welcoming to country. So I'd like to begin by welcoming you to country. I'd like to acknowledge that the traditional owners and custodians of this land on which I'm currently walking, sitting, and breathing are from the Darug Nation. The sovereignty of this land has never been ceded. And I'd like to pay my respects and my gratitude to the Darug elders of the past, elders of the present, and emerging elders, and to commit myself to building a more inclusive Australia through my words, through my thoughts, and through my actions. So welcome to country, welcome home. So dear community, as I was reflecting on the threads that were alive for me today to speak of this weaving that I spoke of earlier, I was remembering a phrase, a Zen phrase that's attributed to one of the great Zen teachers of all time, who's not really spoken of a lot these days. His name in English is Master Cloud Gate. In Chinese, it's Master Yun Men, or in Vietnamese, Van Mon. He was once asked by a student, what's the real essence of Buddhism? What's the essence of the Buddhist practice? And he responded with the phrase, the essence of Buddhist practice is to learn to respond appropriately. That's a lifetime's work right there, to learn what it means to respond appropriately in each and every moment. I'll never forget back in 1999 when I was our teacher's attendant. I was traveling with him to London, and we offered a number of retreats and evenings of mindfulness in and around London. For some reason, whenever our teacher was in the city of London, he wanted to visit the British Museum, not to look at the Buddhist artifacts. He was really uninterested in those for some reason, but he wanted to visit the mummy. And so that morning we were going to the British Museum, and we had to take the tube. So we were on the subway, on the metro system in London. It was packed with commuters. It was absolutely jam-packed. So we were on this commuter carriage of the train, and everybody was silent, looking down at their newspapers. Nobody really had smartphones back then. everybody was looking at newspapers or magazines or studiously looking out the window, ignoring each other. And then Tay said to the monastics that were there were about 5 or 6 of us, let's sing a song. And I thought to myself, oh God, no. And I cringed inside and I started to edge away in the carriage. I started to push through the people to kind of pretend that I wasn't with this group of people. And then, so everybody started singing a song loudly in the carriage, and you could have heard a pin drop. People were shocked. They were looking around. They didn't know what to expect. I guess they were waiting for us to go around with the cans and take some money. But anyway, I was edging away, and I edged away about 3 or 4 people before the song ended. And then I heard Tay's voice call out, Brother Fapai, sing a song, sing Happiness is Here and Now. And so in that moment, I thought, you know what? I really need to just practice to be with what is. So I began to lead the song Happiness is Here and Now. And I'll admit that I wasn't necessarily feeling those feelings or those emotions at the moment, but I also realized that Tay was offering me a great teaching to encounter each moment as an opportunity to open my heart, as an opportunity to connect, as an opportunity to be fully myself, and to offer what needed to be offered in that moment, to bring myself and others to life, just as it is. And later, when we were having tea, Tay said, you know what? Those people will go in all different directions. We'll probably not ever meet again. But for many of them, from time to time, when they think back to that moment, in difficult moments of their life, it'll bring a smile to their face. And sometimes that's all that we can offer. In order for our practice to be real, to be relevant, to be transformative, our real work, it seems to me, is to show up for what is just as it is. Reverend Patty shared about the oneness of life. In our Plum Village tradition, we call this insight of the oneness of life, the oneness of experience into being. And this insight is sorely needed at this moment in time. There's a beautiful poem by Ryokan, a little haiku, and it goes, in an old temple, Mount Koya, I listened to raindrops falling from a cedar tree. The word listen and the word silent have the same letters. So from the Jewish tradition, we have this practice of looking at the letters of a word and moving them around and seeing equivalencies. So we can see that listen and silent are very much interconnected. We can only listen deeply to each moment of our life when we develop the capacity of silence. Developing the capacity to listen deeply to each and every moment, to listen to our lives just as they are, builds resilience to enable us to respond appropriately and not just to contribute to the noise. And there's certainly a lot of noise right now. Noise inside and noise outside. In moments like this moment in which we're finding ourselves, when we find that up is down, when night is day, when it's so often impossible to discern any way out, stopping, dropping in, and opening a space of availability can seem like an incredible indulgence, when in fact it seems to me that it's an absolute necessity. I've noticed that many of us, when we embark on our spiritual lives, are looking for something that we think we lack. We want to get something that we think we don't have, and that might be peace, it might be happiness, it might be enlightenment, it might be liberation, whatever word comes up. And this is where Buddhism is quite radical, because Buddhist practice doesn't begin from this attitude of lack, this idea that we need something else. But rather it's a continuous practice of letting go of accumulated layers in order to uncover what has been there all along. If we're not careful, then this attitude of lack can become pervasive and become the shadow side, the undercurrent of our entire spiritual life. I've begun to notice similar attitudes with regard to social action. I wonder if we can make this sea change individually and collectively to refocus our activism externally and internally on recognizing, nurturing, and reestablishing that inclusiveness, that equality, that goodness, that peace, which is our individual and collective birthright, and which in a way has been there from the very beginning, but has been covered over through our individual and collective hatred, through ignorance and through greed, manifesting in so many ways, such as colonialism, racial superiority, homophobia, and so many other manifestations. To let that infinite light, that infinite life that Reverend Patty spoke about, which is the foundation of our being, burst forth. A few weeks ago, I offered a talk for Deer Park's 20th anniversary. Some of you mentioned that, and Leah mentioned that in her introduction earlier. And as I was reflecting on what felt like needed to be shared today, one of the stories I shared in that talk feels relevant for this moment. I shared about the metaphor used in Buddhism of a raging stream, more of a torrent really. When I think of this torrent, I remember years ago when the brothers in Plum Village were on their first canoeing outing. We were canoeing down the river, and the brother who was in the canoe with me said, "Brother Fapai, lay down and take a rest. I'll row for a while." So I laid down and I napped. And suddenly our canoe was caught in some rapids, and I was flung out of the boat into the rapids, and I didn't know which way was up or down, and I began thrashing around. I was disoriented, and after thrashing around for a while, I realized that the first thing I needed to do, even though it was the last thing I wanted to do, was to stop struggling against myself, to try to relax in the middle of that whirlpool and to let the stream be the stream. That way, I would be able to figure out what I needed to do and what I didn't need to do. So I did that. I let my body go limp, and a few seconds later, I broke the surface. Letting our bodies go limp in the middle of a whirlpool, whether it's a whirlpool outside or a whirlpool inside, is the very last thing we feel like doing. In fact, every cell of our body rebels against it. This is not the same as surrender. It's a choice to understand, to gain clarity, and to be able to take a breath. For many of us, just the possibility to be able to take a breath, to be able to rest for a moment, can seem like an incredible luxury when it seems like the whirlpool, the raging torrent of racism, racialization, division, homophobia, of self and other hatred, of shame, of continual micro and macro aggressions is present everywhere, and also in each of our own hearts. When, like me, in the story I just shared, will we be able to break the surface of this raging water and take a breath? So many of us are tired. So many of us have internalized this war. So many, especially our young, think that the world would be a better place if they were not in it. Rather than being a surrender or a passive acceptance, letting our bodies go limp in the middle of the raging torrents inside and around is to give up the fight against ourselves, or internalizing the messages that we receive from others, and to acknowledge our capacity to kick out and to swim forward in the direction that the insight we all carry in our body leads us to want to go. This is a radical act. This is a radical act of self-love, of you saying to yourself, I love you. I'm here for you. I'm able to do this. I can take another step. In Buddhism, this raging torrent within and around us that's flowing in one direction is our real work as practitioners to recognize and to swim against. This is the gift and the healing that we bring ourselves and we bring to the world, even if hundreds of times a day we might wish for another path or any other gift. And to engage in this real work is hard. It's painful, it's raw, and it's heartbreaking. And our spirits, our hearts can collapse in and on themselves, as they have done for so many. Or they can break us open. We can engage in this as a kind of war, thrashing around, but we're just going to tire ourselves out and we won't get very far. Or we can choose to soften our bodies, soften our hearts, and relentlessly keep moving forward. The definition of relentless is continuing in a determined way without any interruption in each and every moment. And to me, I feel that being relentless is the very heart of the spiritual life, the heart of the practice, the very essence of becoming real. And being real means to recognize that real and lasting transformation can only occur when we show up fully for what is. First of all, within our own mind and within our own heart, and at the same time for the world around. When we consider social action, we often think of transforming the world outside. In Buddhism, we have the insight that the world outside and the world inside are one. As Audre Lorde says, to work against the external structures of our oppression will not effect lasting change, since the fundamental issues will remain. It's time for us to do the unglamorous but essential work of getting real, of taking ownership of the shadows in our own minds and hearts and not falling into the idea that they're somehow wrong. But by bringing a loving, open-hearted attention to them, they can become the noble messengers of our life, calling us forth. Actually, at the base, there's nothing wrong with suffering. It's part of the way things are. It can either shut us down or call us forth into a healing journey. That which we're most afraid of, that which is most challenging, that which is most difficult, if we know how to turn towards it, we know how to look into it, it can become the greatest teacher of our life. Many times, our idea of the practice, our idea of what constitutes real and lasting change can prevent us from touching the reality that the most fundamental change, the most fundamental precondition for real and lasting change is to build the courage to turn towards that which is most challenging, most difficult, most abhorrent, and to recognize it as a great teacher. There's a famous Zen saying, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. This is quite shocking, quite a shocking saying. But I feel it's an invitation for this moment. If your teacher, whether a person or a situation, is not pushing your envelope, is not challenging you, is just confirming what you already know, then it's not a real teacher because we haven't grown in any way at all. The invitation for this moment is for us to have the courage to meet the unexpected, the real teachers of our life, which are present for us in abundance right now. Our greatest teachers can be the difficult, the painful, the confusing, not celestial beings floating on clouds. In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha says to the celestial bodhisattvas, I don't want your help. I want the help from the bodhisattvas bursting from the earth. Those that are real, those that have dirt under their fingernails. To be those bodhisattvas takes courage. The first step in this work is a step of resourcing ourselves. And that's the practice of changing the peg. If something is overwhelming, too painful, too difficult, that we feel we might become it, then we may need to place it aside for the time being and to engage in something that's nourishing for a while. But if we just stop there, that would be a pity. Since our spiritual practice, rather than being a liberating path, a path in which we're continually expanding our heart, could become a path of avoidance. And once we've resourced ourselves, our work is then to turn towards that which we don't want to look at, inside or outside, and to allow it to become our noble messenger, calling us forth. We often hear this phrase that's overused in Buddhism, transforming suffering. But I wonder how many of us have asked ourselves whether with regard to the world outside or the world inside, what transformation actually looks like and feels like. Will physical pain and dissatisfaction or so forth just disappear? Is that a precondition for transformation? To me, transformation doesn't mean necessarily that there's no more pain and so forth. Most of the time, that's not possible. But rather that pain, rather than being something to be ignored, to be afraid of, can break our hearts open and we move toward each other rather than further away. To finalize my sharing, to conclude my sharing, I'd like to share that a while back, I received a letter from one of my students that said, "Dear Tay, something beautiful happened over the past weeks. As you know, I've been having a very difficult time. After our consultation, I've been practicing wholeheartedly," which, by the way, is always a lovely thing as a teacher to hear. "And my suffering is not gone, but my attitude has changed towards it after this past week of loving kindness practice. I'm not afraid of my suffering anymore. And I don't keep thinking that I need to get rid of it. I'm determined to embrace whatever comes up tenderly and to make good use of the mud in order to grow lotuses in me." The young ones can be our greatest teachers, because true insight doesn't arise from thinking. It would be great if it did, but from bringing mindfulness and concentration and cultivating steadfastness in each and every moment, whether it's a pleasant moment, a painful moment, or both. You can do this. The Buddha said you can do this. So it's time for each of us to acknowledge to ourselves that we can do this. Here in Mountain Spring, we have large eucalyptus trees, and there's one that is growing on top of a large rock, and it sent its roots down over the rock into the rich soil. And the invitation of this moment is for each of us to send a taproot down into the heart of our own lives, into the heart of our own experience just as it is, and to let that wisdom that is right within your own life, the lived experience of your own life, which might be messy, might be raw. I hope it will be, but at least it'll be real and embodied, be the wisdom that you bring, because we need bodhisattvas with dirt under their fingernails right now. We need that real lived experience. In that way, each of us, in each and every moment, will be able to contribute to the transformation within and around that's sorely needed, and not to the continual noise. So dear beloved community, it seems to me that my time is up. 20 minutes is really short. I hope that something has been of benefit. It's such a delight to have a chance to be together with you and to learn with you. Blessings.
Thank you so much, dear Brother Fapai. So many little gems there, and much to chew upon. I really love the use of relentless practice. Thank you so much for that, and to respond appropriately. I think you said once in a Dharma message, each moment only once. And I find that I continue to revisit that. So thank you. Thank you for being here. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Larry Ward now. And as Brother Fapai had mentioned about the dirt under your fingernails, it was in this introduction, it was the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that was a catalyst that I think helped to bring Larry to this journey of peacemaker and peacemaking. And so with that background of over many, many years of civil rights work, of community organizing, of service work around the world, Dr. Ward teaches how we are capable of transforming our individual and our collective suffering through Buddhism. And he really draws upon, in a very unique way, of drawing upon neuroscience and mindfulness practice, embodied healing, and ancestral wisdom that is all contained within each one of us. And so it's kind of like finding our way back to our original self, to our Buddha nature, is how I've been looking at it more recently. And I wanted to just name a few things that other folks have been saying about Dr. Ward. This is just a few quotes that I came upon. Dr. Ward is an elder who holds a high and honored Dharma seat in the lineage of Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a senior Dharma teacher in the Plum Village tradition. He is inspiring today's young generation of spirit-led seekers and activists through liberative and tender work. Those are just a couple of examples. And I encourage you to, if you haven't had an opportunity to listen to some of his Dharma talks through the Lotus Institute, there is a large array if you are new to learning and listening from Dr. Larry Ward. He has a new book that was published recently called America's Racial Karma. And it's a true invitation to healing. It's a true invitation of many of the Dharma, of the teachings of the Buddha through his unique path of growing up in this country, of traveling and teaching in many other places, of really understanding the roots of our racialized karma in this country. And I just would like to add here that today is a culmination of when we have the opportunity to imagine and dream. This is such a pleasure to bring all of these teachers here today together. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Larry Ward. I think you might be muted, Dr.
Larry,
Ward.
I'm sorry.
There we go.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Vista Buddhist Temple, for inviting me into your company again. I've been meditating on the question of how do Buddhists cope and during this time. And my first thought was, I don't want to cope. I'm interested in helping myself get beyond coping to living, to enhancing, to growing, to imagining, to healing. Too often, I think we take shamatha practice to mean we're supposed to stop there instead of going deeper into shamatha, which can take us all the way to the love that is equanimity. And then there's the work of our insight, of understanding how we are conditioned and discovering how that came to be and discovering how we can release ourselves from our conditioning. The image I use for this is the rose bush that used to be outside of our door in Taos, New Mexico. And we replanted it. We bought it from a place and replanted it in our yard. And it became an object of meditation for me every day. And I realized after a while, rose bush knows how to construct the new rose and to let go of the old rose at the same time. It's just a marvelous process to behold in the natural world, how the symbiosis of life and death are not in conflict. And so I've focused this talk today on the practices I'm doing on a daily basis that I want to share with you. I concur with what's been said already by the two previous teachers who I'm inspired by. So thank you both. My first practice, I should say, I spend a lot of time these days in the lying down meditation position. I spend a lot of time coming back to my body. I've shared with some people during my writing of the book on America's Racial Karma, I cried every day. Actually, I told my wife one day I didn't know I had this many tears available. And so I've been learning how to take the practice into spaces of trauma in myself. Spaces, and by trauma, I mean dysregulation of my nervous system, where I find fear, where I find anger, where I find numbness or frozenness of, or I want to run away from the reality of life. And so the first practice I do every morning before I get out of bed is called the Five Remembrances. I remember I'm of a nature to grow old, and I have a whole process of coming to terms with aging. And the more I have discovered the natural world of which I am a part, the more I realize this is the nature of things. It is not just personal. Everything ages. We have an 18-year-old dog who walks slower than I do. And he's a meditation for me of the nature of things. And part of our dilemma in my view right now is that we don't take the practice off the cushion into the forest where it began, where we can contemplate the tree, contemplate the mountain and the river and the monkey and the bird and the jackrabbit and whatever is around us, so that we can see reality taking place right within us and right all around us. The second thing I remember in this practice is I am of a nature to have ill health, or I am vulnerable physically and mentally. And the more I embrace my own vulnerability, the more I'm able to embrace your vulnerability and our vulnerability together. The third remembrance is I am of nature to die. And I recently discovered a wonderful meditation from early China called the white bone meditation. And it's actually a meditation on your skeletal structure. And that'll do it. If you're confused about something, if you don't understand the miracle of life, if you can't be touched by it and touch it, the wonder of our humanity, we miss the miracle of mindfulness, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say. The third remembrance is everything I love and everything I cherish is of a nature to change. I cannot escape being separated from it or from them. And in many ways, this is the crisis America has right now, politically. I wrote a short note this morning when I woke up after my meditations. I put on my Twitter, I think it was, and I just said, I used to live in Hong Kong. And when I was in Hong Kong, Chuck E. Cheese became a really big thing. Hundreds of kids and parents. The note I wrote this morning for everyone is it can be difficult to get a toddler out of Chuck E. Cheese without a mess. That is the only political statement I'll make today. Loss, our capacity to experience, letting go, our capacity to live in the flow of impermanence of ourselves and of our systems is part of what, for me, the practice can open us up to in deeper ways. The fifth remembrance is my actions are the ground on which I stand. And one of the English translations is I have to deal with the consequences of my actions. I like to reframe consequences into the continuation of my actions. My actions are not just personal consequences. This is another thing we're dealing with in this society right now. The notion that what I do doesn't impact anyone else. So the continuation of our actions, as we are taught in our tradition in Buddhism as a whole, matters. And therefore our actions matter because they continue. Our thinking continues, our language continues beyond our lifetime, and our behavior conditions everyone around us and generations to come. So I begin my day that way. And then I take a walk. I'm living at an Airbnb right now while we wait on landing in a new house. And my friend, who's a Sangha member and leader, has a circle in her driveway divided into 8 parts. And so every day I've been doing a 8-fold path walking meditation for myself. starting with right view. And when I stand in that space, I ask myself the question, am I standing in right view today? Where am I unclear today? Where am I confused? What questions are coming to me today about my view of myself and my view of the world? And then I go to right thinking and I ask myself, what am I thinking about? Is the thought patterns I'm having nourishing? Or do my thought patterns condemn me to a small, selfless, self-centered life? And then on to right concentration, right samadhi, right mindfulness, right effort, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And so I've been enjoying pausing at each one of those blocks and asking myself these questions. So for me, the practice is also highly and deeply reflective so that we can become more comfortable seeing ourselves as who we are. Carl Jung, in a book called The Undiscovered Self that I studied many years ago, it dawned on me in the study of this work, in which he basically says the future will bring the shadows we don't handle, the shadows in us, the hidden places in us of our pain, our sorrow, our greed, our hatred, our delusion. And unless we and those things have now surfaced in America. I like to think of this time period we've just entered as the great unease. And irregardless of the election results, the unease has risen to the surface for all of us to practice with. And so mindfulness of the body, for me, is the most important practice right now, personally. Learning how to respond to my nervous system and the stresses of this moment of uncertainty, of racial reckoning, of my own grief, of my grief I have for this land, for the peoples who were here before me, and their tragedy, their genocide. And so I practice so that my heart can hold all this, and that my mind can hold all this, so that I can recognize the good in myself. And as I'm able to recognize the good in myself, I'm able to recognize the good in you. And when I'm able to recognize the good in you, I can recognize the good between us and among us. And this deep recognition is where we must come together, which is part of what's so beautiful about this day, this gathering. I also try to touch the wonders of life every day. Every day I try to be shocked into amazement about the beauty of the world, the flutter of the butterfly, the color of the flowers. I talk to birds. I talk to other things too, but I talk to birds, and I've been living in this place for 3 weeks, and finally they started talking back the day before yesterday. And so I feel so important that we spend time outdoors, in the sense of not being confined to 4 walls, so that we can be touched by the miracle of the earth that sustains us and cares for us. And that we somehow have imagined the earth as a factory designed for our shopping instead of our mother, instead of our life force, instead of the gratitude due to us and our ancestors for our presence here, for our life here. I tend to my grief every day as it arises. And so I've trained myself and continue to train myself in what people popularly call resilience practices, self-regulation. But for me, this is all grounded in mindfulness in the body and all taught in different ways in the Buddhist tradition, to learn how to be with ourselves, to handle our emotions, to handle our fear, to handle our confusion without pretending it's not there. And that's revolutionary to me. That is cultivating the mind of love. And my work in the world is to cultivate the mind of love in others, to help others recognize their own mind of love, covered over by their suffering, covered over by their busyness or laziness or sorrow, but the mind of love, Buddha nature, still there. And to help all of us come home to that deep nature so it can flow through everything we do. It can flow through our schools and our organizations. And I'm not talking about perfect organizations or systems, but I'm about something different, something we have secretly imagined of what is possible. And for me, imagination, very important practice, grounded in the present moment. I was meeting with a group of teachers in Bangkok recently, and my question to them was, what kind of a school do you want? So we worked out a plan, and they asked the parents, what kind of school do they want for their children? What curriculum, what qualities of being a human being did they want in their children? And then the children are being interviewed this week to find out what they think their education should be. And everyone will be shocked at the similarities and the differences between the parents and children. This kind of communication is important for our compassion, for our compassionate action, so that we don't treat our children like objects to be filled, but like human beings to aid in their flourishing, in their beauty, in their growth, in the miracle of their own greatness as human beings. Meditation I do at night. Before I go to sleep, I take 108 breaths, counting from 1 to 108, and then I finally learn how to count backwards all the way. And in training myself with this, it's a pain, you know, when I get to 9 and my mind changes, I have to go back to 1. And so I've been learning how to do this for years and years and years. So I started with 10. I did not start with 108. Somebody asked me, you start with 108? I didn't. So and what that's done for me is I wake up with a very clear mind. The quality of concentration helps my mind be focused, helps my mind be aware of itself, the games it plays, the tricks it plays, and the insight it has. So the natural world. The other thing I do every day in terms of caring for myself and keeping my compassion alive is I listen to music. And I've been listening to 3 things in particular. I won't go into detail. I'll just share the name. I've been listening to a Nina Simone, because she holds the pathos, the sorrow and insight of the African American journey in song, and so do many other people. But I lived in the same city she lived in after she was gone, and so her voice, that piano, rings my heart open in compassion and wisdom. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free, is her song. There's another tune on Facebook called Seriously that actually is a contrast, but it is a song written by someone with the backstory. This is what Obama would say if he could about his experience. It's brilliant, beautifully done and brilliant. The third song I've been listening to is We Shall Be Known, which I like to turn into the question, how shall we be known? How shall this generation be known? I think we need to step beyond commercialized categories for who we are. Baby boomer generation. I mean, we have these consumer definitions of ourselves, and I'm not going to let myself be reduced by market science into some object. You know, we've done this to our forests. We've done this to the waters. We've turned them all into objects of commercialization and extraction. People too. My ancestors were extracted out of Africa and brought here. So I find it astounding when somebody runs up to me, you know, people about my house, I've been threatened to be hung, blah, 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 and said, well, what are you doing here? Well, it wasn't my idea, but here I am. And because I am, I'm going to be here. I'm going to retain my sense of sovereignty that the practice gives us all, to walk deeply into our path, to not have to run from our pain, but to learn how to love ourselves, how to love one another, to be engaged, but not entangled, to me is the key practice right now. Fully engaged, but not caught, not entangled in our engagement, because then we can't get out to be engaged again. So it's my pleasure again to share a few minutes with you. I appreciate your smiles and your attention and the nourishment from the teachers before me, both now and throughout history of our beautiful tradition of Buddhism. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Ward, for your very powerful message. I was especially moved by your call to arms at the very beginning to move beyond coping and really focusing on healing and living. So thank you so much for that.
Sure.
We are going to take a short 5-minute break. And then when we get back, we're going to launch into our panel discussion. I wanted to remind everyone that if you have a question, please direct it to me through the chat. And then we will kind of reorder the questions and mix it up with the ones that we've already gotten through the registration. And then we will pose various questions to our panelists and our teachers today. So with that, if you can be back around 4:20, let's say 4:25, we'll give ourselves a few more minutes. So if you can be back by 4:25, that would be great. Feel free to stop your video if you have it on right now. And then again, don't forget to drop questions into the chat. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your short break. We're going to now transition into the panel discussion. So what I'm going to do is take the questions that were submitted during registration and then the ones that have come in today during the presentations. We're going to combine a few that were similar. We will get through as many as we can. We received quite a few great questions, and for us, they've really reflected what's most pressing in our community's heart and mind. And so what we are going to do is reflect on the questions that have been submitted and consider offering some future standalone classes to address some of these questions because they are very weighty topics. So stay tuned for more on those future classes. So what I'm going to do is start out reading our first question, and I'm going to pose this to all three of our panelists, but let's start with Brother Fapai first. So all three of you have talked about focusing on the self first, and we've gotten quite a few questions about how to deal with one's own personal emotions. Specifically, I think for many of us, the emotion of anger. And when it seems so justified to have feelings of anger today, especially around all of the many things that you've spoken about, racial injustice, politics, the climate. So sort of with that lens, do you have any suggestions or offerings for those of us that are experiencing those emotions, including and especially anger, and how to address that?
I think this is a wonderful question. It's a question that so many of us share. And the first thing that's really coming to my mind and heart is something that my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, shared once. He said, there's nothing wrong. We're not a bad practitioner if we get angry, but we're a bad practitioner, to use the same thing, if we don't practice with it. And so in our practice of Plum Village, we don't get in this mindset of calling some emotions or some experiences positive and some emotions or experiences negative. Rather, we consider them to be perhaps skillful and not yet skillful. So anger is a natural response to many of the situations that have been described in our discussion this morning. The question is, how can we transform that energy? Because if we don't know how to handle it well, it can be incredibly destructive. So the first thing I found very helpful myself is to recognize that I'm angry. So many of us can carry, particularly when there's so many microaggressions, there's just so many overwhelming macroaggressions as well. It can just build up so much, and we don't even recognize on a conscious level that we're angry. So to be able to recognize physically what I'm feeling, to see how it feels in my body, how it's feeling in my mind, and to not say that there's something wrong with that, but to be able to recognize it and to accept it. And then I practice to what I call embracing, which is kind of the energy of being like a mother, to say, you know, it's okay to be angry. There's nothing wrong with this. Let me take care of this energy so that it doesn't spill out and create a terrible situation around. Because if I don't take care of this energy, it might cause even more destruction around me, whether in relationships or physically, as you know, we've seen. So in that time, what I will do is, from recognizing how that energy feels in my body, I practice to do things that nourish me, that diffuse that energy, whether it's lying on the earth, whether it's going and doing walking meditation, whether it's doing something physical, or even something just like listening to a gentle piece of music, not to suppress it, be able to calm that energy down, so then I can look deeply into what was the stimulus of that anger. Was it just that situation that occurred, or is it bringing up some past trauma, some deep trauma, whether of my own or from my ancestors or from this society? Is it mine alone? And then when I look into that anger, it can become a great source of insight, a great source of wisdom for me. Then if I understand that stimulus, where it comes from, and I understand what that anger is trying to call me to respond to, then I'm able to know what I need to do and what I don't need to do. And it becomes something incredibly useful rather than something that is that can be destructive. So that's my practice: to recognize, to accept, to embrace that, and to look deeply into the sources of that, and from that understanding to choose how to respond. So that's how I practice with anger. So I'd love to hear how what other suggestions the other panelists have.
Thank you. Dr. Ward? You're on mute, Dr. Ward. Oh.
For me, practicing with anger, it helps me to remember that it's a biological response, that it's my body sending me a message that either I've been harmed, someone I love has been harmed, I'm about to be harmed, but it has to do with my body responding to being alive. And so I remember that experience is not the same thing as ill will, even though sometimes it's been framed that way in some of the things that have been written. Ill will is my conscious choice to take my energy of anger and do harm with it, to direct it toward creating suffering, or payback, or revenge, or things like that. So my practice with anger, besides that, is walking meditation. I have learned how to take my anger and let it fall out of my body into the earth, and to have the earth's energy replenish my energy. So I don't try to, my anger is not personal. It is ancient. It is ancestral. It is not just a Larry Ward moment. And so our understanding of emptiness is very important here as we practice with our anger. And as the brother said, looking into our anger, what were the conditions? What stimulated our anger? What message is coming from our anger that we can take responsibility for? So for me, it's not a matter of simply saying I'm angry and then turning inward, turning the anger inward, which can become depression, et cetera, but taking that energy of anger, once I look deeply into it and ask myself, where does that ask me to direct my energy of compassion? Where am I being invited to be a compassionate human toward myself, my own pain? And where am I invited to be compassionate in action toward others who find the fire of anger burning them too?
Thank you. Reverend Uzuki? You're also on mute.
She's still on mute.
Anger arises. It's as it has already been said. We can't categorize it into a negative thing. It arises, but it's what we do with it. So, as has been said, we have to look at it, look at our reaction. We often say, we cause ourselves so much harm with this anger that arises, which we are directing outwards, but in fact, as we often use this image of picking up a hot coal to throw it at somebody else who gets burned, right? And so if we take the time to notice, and at the same time realize, perhaps by not letting go, I am harming myself, and I don't need to, because I do receive this unconditional compassion from life, that even though I'm angry, or even though I have greed, or even though I suffer from delusion, still, unconditionally, I receive this compassion from great life. And that's just in that thought moment, because it's a lot faster than my saying this. It's, for me, enough to cool the situation. We, as Shin Buddhists, may say Namo Amida Butsu. In my temple, someone once said, well, you often give examples of when good things happen, and then you feel, oh, I really rely on the compassion of great life. But this person said, when not skillful things are going on within me, that's when Namo Amida Butsu, I rely on infinite life, arises within me. And that's so true, right? We take it for granted. Knowing this empowers us. It empowers us. So, as Dr. Ward said, we could direct that energy towards doing something that is going to take a step towards rectifying what it is. So we need to look at it in that way, and not as something to deal with, but something to look at and to work with.
Thank you all. So my next question is actually for Dr. Ward specifically. Can you give advice on how to stay engaged without getting entangled, which is something that you had mentioned in your talk? How can you tell when you are becoming entangled? And if you are entangled, How do you distangle while still staying engaged?
That could take a whole 21-day retreat, but at least in my experience. So what I'm learning to do, to kind of use the methodology that Brother Fapai is talking about, I'm learning to recognize when I'm entangled, when I'm caught, when I am frozen in place, either in view or in thought or in behavior. So first recognize, and you know, the teachings on the five skandhas are, people forget they're often early Buddhism introduced as the five aggregates of clinging. And so where I find myself clinging either to a view or an emotion, or an energy, whether it's anger, clinging to the skandhas, the body, my aversions, my pleasure directions, my perceptions, clinging, holding on, gripping, solidifying what is not solid, including myself. It's how I stay unentangled, because it helps me to remember that I'm a process. I was asked in my dissertation defense by the committee that, you know, we liked your dissertation. You never mentioned the word self in your whole dissertation. What do you mean by self? I said, self is a process. That's all I know. And so as long as we can approach our life as a process of wonder, of a miracle in motion, along with all the other processes that sustain us in the world, with the processes of our ancestors moving us forward in the generations into the future. So I asked myself, if I'm caught, if I'm entangled in this, who will that help? Who benefits from my entanglement? And so when I work with activists in particular, this is important to remember, because the colonial mind already has a plan for our entanglement, right? The police are already ready. So what our system cannot handle is our sovereignty, our freedom, our taking responsibility for our own life. It doesn't know how to handle. There's a woman in Portland recently during a protest in front of the police, which were arming themselves, took off her clothes and stopped everything. And that wasn't about her body, that was about vulnerability. And so learning how to be vulnerable, learning how to know when we did not succeed or we failed, and learning how to learn from that. So for me, continuous learning is how we stay untangled. And also a recent thing I have learned and put into practice, if you don't have a mentor in your life younger than you, you're probably making a mistake. The world has changed so much in the last generation. And so to have friends and teachers among us of every age, intergenerational, is very, very important at this time.
Thank you. Brother Fapai, would you expand a bit on the fascinating theme you mentioned about the importance of educational discomfort?
Yeah, all the questions so far have been amazing. This is another one of those amazing questions. I'm not trying to get out of responding, but in Zen, we also learn to love the questions themselves. And I think that this capacity to love the question and not to be seeking for the answer all the time is a sea change. It's a radical transformation, because we want everything to fit into different categories, different boxes, but to actually turn towards our own experience, to look deeply into the heart of our own life, and to be able to tap the wisdom that's there and not think that we need somebody else to tell us what we actually already know on a cellular level is a radical act, and it's the act that's needed for this moment in time. So in Buddhism, we're not so interested in to be honest, we're not so interested in the why questions. We're interested in the how questions, how something came to be. Because when we ask the question why, well, it can be interesting or something. It can kind of presuppose that there's some kind of meaning out there. So with that kind of framework, when we're looking into our experience of our life with an attitude of how did something come to be, whether it's a situation of discomfort, educational discomfort, or whether it's a situation of joy, then that's incredibly empowering. The situation of educational discomfort is actually the heart of the spiritual life. When we look at the story of Siddhartha Gautama, for example, this story that we can take literally or we can look metaphorically. And I really believe that it's also each of our stories. There's a story of a prince who was sheltered behind the walls of a castle. These walls were so high and his father was so afraid that life would touch him that he protected him from all of our everyday experiences, the things that, even though we may not want to look at them, are kind of taken for granted. Getting older, which is no small thing. It's a big thing. Sickness, death, and so on. So he, even with all of this protection, he was dissatisfied, and the story goes that he burst out of the palace gates one by one and came into contact with these situations that shocked him to his core. And then he went back to behind the walls, to the palace gates. And in that moment, when that happened to the prince and he went back behind the gates, that's what happens to us. But eventually he burst out of the gates and went forth on his journey of discovery. He realized that there were two choices. One was to retreat behind the walls, shut the gates, and build the walls even higher. Or he could step out and embark on this journey of discovery. So this is not the story of somebody who lived 2,600 years ago. This is each of our stories on a moment-by-moment basis. So the Buddha had his, what we call noble messengers, those difficult, painful, raw situations that shocked him to his core. And at that moment, he could have shut down and imploded. And if you take it metaphorically, he sort of did. He went back to the palace for a little bit. And that's what we do as humans. But then he allowed them to call him forth. So each of us in our own life have our own noble messengers. They might be similar to the Buddha, or they might be things that we spoke of earlier, such as anger, or they might be racialization or racism. They could be any number of painful and difficult situations. And so for us as spiritual practitioners, we need to keep going, keep developing, keep moving forward, to let ourselves be called out of our comfort zones, and to not let ourselves settle. We have a word for practitioners in Buddhism. It's coming from the Chinese and the Vietnamese. It's left home. In Chinese, it's chuja. In Vietnamese, sukya, means left home. And of course, it means physically leaving home in a way. But on a deeper level, it means recognizing the places that we hide and stepping forward into the discomfort where the real insight is. So that is a moment-by-moment practice for each one of us. And that is how we actually bring the wisdom, the insight that's in each of our lives, and not to just bring forth somebody else's insight, because it's each of your insight that's needed at this moment in time. And the kind of healing, the kind of wisdom that you're called to bring to the world might be slightly different to the healing and the wisdom that the Buddha or other teachers brought forward. And that is something to celebrate. My teacher said something to me about 23 years ago. He said to me, you know what, Brother Fapai, if in 20 years you're doing the same thing, you failed. And I think, well, he wasn't talking about necessarily the same schedule or eating, different, things and stuff like that. Actually, what he was talking about is continually moving forward. Like Larry said, the rose bush, being willing to let go of the roses of this year in order to bring forward the roses of next year. That's a scary thing, but that's the invitation. That's what educational discomfort is all about, of inviting you, rather than turning outside to somebody else's experience, to have the courage to turn towards your own experience and to be able to admit to yourself once and for all that you have the capacity to understand it. And this situation that is confusing, that is difficult, that's painful, can be and is the wisdom that you are asked to bring to the world. So that's what I want to say about educational discomfort.
Thank you very much. Okay, Reverend Patty, are there limits to the exercise of compassion? Are there limits to the exercise of compassion?
So we have, again, just to perhaps look at the word compassion from the point of view of ordinary compassion, which we all hope to have, of feeling for someone, commiserating, and so on. But great compassion, under unconditional compassion, we human beings have still work to do, because we do have our greed, our anger, our delusion. And that's why we have to work with these things when they arise. But that's why we call it limited compassion or small compassion. So it's compassion, but it's what we're capable of. And then if we look closely at a certain case, we can see, okay, I'm limited. Maybe it's not something like I'll donate to him, but not to him. But it may be something else. Or we may, as I said earlier, feel, oh, I want to help there, but I just find it cannot. In the little reenactment there, that grandmother was full of great compassion, but didn't have the means to fulfill it. And yet other people were touched by this story, and though they were told to, maybe in this day and age we'd have a crowdfunding with a story like that, and people are touched to help someone they don't even know. But we nonetheless have that limitation, just to be aware of it. It doesn't mean this is not an either or. This is a both and, but to see that we can be empowered by knowing that I, a person such as myself, who, when I really look at my heart of hearts, have so much work to do on the causes of my dukkha, my suffering, and I receive this great compassion. If this is true for me, then that is unlimited. And I feel so grateful that everything I do just arises out of that. And it's not from my doing it, but it's from great life, just working through my life, through my causes and conditions, to bring me to do what it is I do. Maybe it's what brought Mayor LaGuardia to do what he did, if that was a true story. But it works in everyone in different ways. I heard about a billionaire named Sanford, who donated $100 million to UCSD to study compassion and empathy. Why? Because he'd had a conversation with the Dalai Lama on that topic. We don't know what our causes and conditions are. And so we can't calculate the compassion that we give. Only the unconditional compassion of infinite life is going to bring it all together. And for that, if we feel stronger for it in ourselves, then we can do the work that we each are doing. And I totally agree. We can't teach someone to be compassionate or tell someone to be compassionate. It's going to arise in us, and we're going to be who we are, and we're fine just as we are. Each of us is fine just as we are. We could use a little work, as they say, but we are fine just as we are.
That's a reassuring message. Thank you, Reverend Patty. Okay, so we have our final question. I know I can't believe it that we're already at the end of our Q&A. And thank you again for everyone for your questions. And I apologize we couldn't get to all of them. So our last question, is Buddhism considered religion or state of mind? So Brother Fapai, I'm going to start with you.
I wonder why I'm started with these kind of questions. I'll be interested in the other viewpoints. And I lately I'm offering a series of teachings on views. And so I find it quite paradoxical. And I love paradoxes. The fact that here I am sharing a view on this issue while I'm teaching about letting go of all views. A view is a perspective. And a number of years ago, I was asked to lead a retreat in Ukiah at an institute called the Mariposa Institute. And it was like there were two sides of the canyon, and we had to walk down in the canyon back up the other side. And the pathway between the meditation hall and the cabin that I was staying was quite a winding path. And I'm from Australia. We like shortcuts. So I was looking everywhere for a shortcut, so I didn't have to walk so far. I was quite frustrated because actually as the crow flies, it wasn't that distant at all, but it was quite a long walk. However, it was so steep that I had to walk this path. So I thought, well, if I have to walk this path, I'm going to make it my practice. I'm not going to struggle with it anymore. So I decided to, every time I took a turn, I came back to the same point, a little bit lower, a little bit higher each time, and I would stop and just be present with my body, present with my breathing, and look at the view. And I realized that each time I came back to the same point, I was looking at the same things, but from a different perspective, seeing something different each time. And so for me, this is a long way of saying that a view is a perspective. It's not the thing in and of itself. There's nothing ultimately wrong with having a view of something, even a view of Buddhism, as long as we don't mistake the view for the reality, the thing in and of itself. And Buddhism is a continuous flowering, a continuous flourishing. The moment we put it in a box, we limit it in some way. Buddhism is only a name for a flowing stream of insight that has continued forever and will continue to flow forever in the future. And it flows through each of our bodies. So I would say also it depends on our own capacity and what's useful for us at this moment in time. If it's useful to approach Buddhism as a spiritual tradition for you at this moment in time, fantastic. I celebrate that. That's amazing. If you approach it as a state of mind, a state of heart, a state of body, fantastic. I celebrate it. If it's a philosophy, wonderful. But at its base, what Buddhism is, if we want to call it anything at all, it's about transforming our suffering. And so that for us in the Plum Village tradition, we're really not so interested in, and it sounds quite heretical to kind of say that, but we're quite okay with that. We're not so interested in preserving Buddhism as an institution. We're interested in preserving the transformational insight of Buddhism. Our teacher Tay was once asked, if you had to choose between Buddhism and world peace, which would you choose? And without any hesitation at all, he said, I would choose world peace. And people were kind of shocked. They were all expecting him to say, well, I would preserve the tradition of Buddhism and things like that. And he said, because the experience of world peace is the lived experience of Buddhism as a reality for each of us. And so for me, that's my response. Depends on our perspective, but at its heart, let your Buddhism, your practice of awakening be an experience that you experience in each and every moment. And in that way, it's of value. It's real, it's relevant, and it's constantly growing. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Brother Fapai. Dr. Ward?
Thank you. A favorite question I like to ask when I receive that question is, how many kinds of Buddhism are there? And what my experience keeps teaching me is infinite types of Buddhism. as simple as Buddhism in Berkeley is not the same thing as Buddhism in Boston, and, or in California, or in Florida, or in Taiwan, or in Thailand, or in Japan, etc. Last night we had a session with some friends and students in Kyoto, and it was such a great joy to be with them. Again, we usually travel there to teach, but we had a Zoom arrangement series we're doing over the next several months. And so I don't question the presence of the Buddha in anyone. For me, Buddhism is this unique affirmation of human experience, and that it can be loved. It can be deepened. And as it goes deeper, we fall into limitless life and light. And so for me, Buddhism is about how to be a human being in the best possible way. It's how it is for me. And that's what I'm always asking myself as I practice. How am I embodying the teachings? How am I embodying any insight that helps me be a continuing contributing force in the human family?
Thank you, Dr. Ward. Reverend Patty?
So I also appreciate that there are no answers. There are responses, and they are perspectives, and it depends on your causes and conditions that lead you to those perspectives. Looking at our organization, not only in the United States, but in Japan and around the world, that's sort of the framework that I think about. And on one hand, I personally like to think of there being no Buddhists, as in how do Buddhists cope, but being. It's a verb. It's not a noun. And in our organization, are people walking the Dharma path together. That could be a whole subject of discussion, as some of you know. Nonetheless, there is a place in religion, if you like to call it that, for ritual, and it has to have meaning. If it becomes an empty ritual, especially when we have the transposition of countries and cultures and languages and so on, then we have to stop and ask, what is useful? What is useful? Because our teaching is something that is to inform our lives, a way to be. And so religion has a place. If we didn't have an institution, it's possible I never would have encountered this particular teaching. And so we don't know, can't see the whole picture. Is it upaya? Is it a skillful means of bringing us to it? For some of us, perhaps, yes. Everyone has their different reasons. So I just have that perspective. And
Great.
leave it at
Thank
that.
you so much. Thanks, Reverend Patty. Thank you to our guest teachers today. Thank you for all of the questions. I really appreciate the dialogue, and I'm going to pass this on to Ricky. Thank you.
Well, like all things I cherish, there's just not enough of it. So I really want to thank the three of you teachers. We are so lucky to have you to share your teachings, and it was a great day. So thank you, teachers. To all of you who attended this, thank you for sharing it with us, and we appreciate that. To the organizing committee at Vista Buddhist Temple for making this happen, thank you so much for that. To the Zoom crew, VBT Zoom crew, thanks for keeping the wheels on the track. For those of you who have given generously to this event, thank you for that. For those of you who care to give to this and haven't had an opportunity yet, there's a link in the chat box. There will be a post that you're going to get a response, a survey, and a link to the video, and there'll also be an opportunity there. Or you could come visit us at vbtemple.org, vbtemple.org at our website, and there's a self-giving button there. So once again, thank you for attending. We'll see you next year. Have a great morning, have a great day, have a great evening, whichever future you're in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky.